Welcome to the Real Estate Espresso Podcast, your morning shot of what's new in the world of real estate investing. I'm your host, Victor Menashe. This is the weekend edition where we interview notable people from the world of real estate investing. Today is no exception. We have a great guest all the way from Steinbach, Manitoba. Welcome to the show, Owen Reimer.
Thanks for having me, Victor. Appreciate it.
Well, great to have you here. Now, Owen, you've been at this game a little while. You've been developing ground-up construction. I'm excited to have this conversation, but before we do, perhaps give a little bit of your backstory and how you got to this point in your journey.
We could do the short version or the long version. I'll give you the short one. Spent about 15 years in financial services. The last 10 of those years, I did a lot of focus with private real estate and private equity. Once I sold that business, was looking for something to do. We'd had some really successful commercial properties in our portfolio ourselves. And so we looked at doing multifamily syndication with brand new development, something that we'd raised capital for in the past for other groups. And now it was time to do it ourselves. So we went into the ground in 2021 and haven't looked back.
So when you're developing, there's always the question whether it makes sense to build versus buy what's existing in the marketplace. And that's always I'll say a creative tension, because often you can buy things for well below replacement cost if they're existing, or as we saw in 2021 and 2022, a lot of those prices got bid up well above the cost of construction. Now, things have normalized a little bit since then. But what is it that drove the decision to go the ground up construction route?
Well, in our area here, I think sometimes that buy versus build is somewhat regional. Where we are in Manitoba, we have strong rent controls. So when you look at existing inventory, often there's not a lot of option to really push rents, even if you do a lot of tenant improvements to it, like, flooring or cabinets or appliances. So, on the cost to build, we have lots of great contractors in our area, and our land costs aren't too out of touch. So when we build brand new, we also avoid rent control for 20 years. So that allows us to make sure rents are market rents. It also allows us to build what the market wants in terms of size and amenities. And I guess just be able to make the numbers work a little better. And exactly that, we're not in competition with, other buyers for existing space. What we've seen in existing product, often you're paying full market value. It's really hard to find a deal in this space out here. So building new allows us to create a bit of a delta between what our cost per door is and what the actual value is at the back end.
There's really three main variables that come into play with new construction. There's your cost to build, there's your rents, and your capital costs. Everything else is more or less fixed. It's a rounding error, and you don't really control the capital cost. You don't really control the build cost apart from maybe some of the finishes. How do you make the numbers work so that you're not building above market?
Well, a lot of times what we're trying to do is find a piece of land that allows us to maybe get a few more doors in than maybe people thought before, so we get a bit better price on our land. Other part of it is we general contract internally. So, the profit piece on building is left to the investors more so than to, let's say, an outside third-party general contractor, where, they're trying to cover their basis and make sure they have lots of contingencies. We make sure we have those contingencies in place while we build, but then on the back end with there's some really creative financing structures for brand new construction here in Canada. We make sure we take advantage of those so we can create, good equity portions for our investors.
That makes a lot of sense. And often the folks who actually do control the construction much more tightly do control the cost significantly, because oftentimes the objective of a third-party general contractor versus the objective for the owner, they're not necessarily aligned. And I've seen it many, many times where the third-party GC is looking to maybe maximize the efficiency from a staffing standpoint, but not necessarily minimize the timelines, not necessarily really value engineer the project. They're just not incented to. The way the contracts are written, nothing is really incented to make the general contractor save a lot of money because it's a different business.
Yeah. We look for ways to, save a dollar here, a dollar there. We talk, if we look and find, you can just go out and find, let's say, a contractor that does cabinets. Now you just pay market value, and as a general contractor, they'll say their preferred contractor that they have doing cabinets. They'll just say this is the price, and it's done. Now we can go out and search and find, let's say, a contractor that does really good work, but we can save $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 a door on our cabinet costs, not just cabinets, but other things as well. Now that flows back to our investors and makes it a really attractive build cost, because we're incentivized not on profit to build, but we're incentivized as we invest in these deals ourselves. So we want to have value at the back end where we can, have good solid cash flow and, equity growth for the long term.
Now, not everybody is who's an investor is set up to GC their own projects. What would be the advice if that's not the case? If you're an independent investor and you're looking to put money to work, you don't want another job because you already had one of those. What would you recommend?
Yeah, it really depends on what you're looking for. I mean, if you're looking to get into new construction, there are lots of guys that are doing this kind of thing. There's maybe not lots, but there's a number of general contractors that build with investors. I mean, that's usually what you want. What we kind of started is we'd had some experience in doing some renovations, and the deal structure, maybe the legal back end structure. We had a lot of good advice, good experience on that side, and good structure. Then what we did is we just found partners in the initial stages, especially that had a lot of construction experience that would help us through those learning phases so that we weren't making too many mistakes. We also started small. We started with a 16 unit. We didn't decide, hey, let's go invest 10 million into a 100-door unit. And if we're off by 2-3%, it starts to turn into big dollars. And if we're off on a littler project, it's not quite as a big pill to swallow. And as we've done this, we kept going up in size, and we kind of stayed in the below 50 doors per building structure right now, because it allows us to, stay in some easier to engineer, easier to design, a little more simpler design structures that don't complicate the cost structure and allow us to really dial in our design. Try to copy things that we've seen from other builders. It's the best way to say it. And we just talk with other guys in our space and make connections that we help each other out, whether it's, sharing up here in Canada, maybe sharing heaters in the wintertime when the other guy doesn't need it, and giving advice of, who's a good electrician or who's a good plumber, making sure we'd share costs of those items. So allows us to really, fine tune who our best contractors are for not just price, but also quality.
When I think about where the risk lies in a lot of new development projects, the number one thing that comes to mind is site work. Even if you can buy a piece of land at a good price, but if all of a sudden your geotech doesn't turn out the way you hoped and you're having to export 10,000 yards of material that's not suitable and then re-import material and build that back up in 12-inch compacted lifts, that's a lot of money being spent for not much value add, even though it's necessary, and probably not something that would have been included in the initial financial model. How do you mitigate those risks?
Yeah, that's a good one. Exactly that. We do geotechnical, so we know what we're kind of biting off before we go too far into it. Right now, I guess, for the most part, the land base that we're on is really stable. We're hitting usually a few feet below surface, maybe 6 to 7 feet below the ground level. We're hitting hard pan. So it allows us to really kind of we know that's in the area, allows us to do not a lot of money up front on our infrastructure of the dirt, I guess what you'd say. We got really good contractors in that space that know the area and know exactly what we're getting into before we get that far. One of our previous builds had a lot of, I guess it was built on a clay base, but the clay was really good. So we could do cast in place concrete piles. Yeah, we put a lot of concrete in the ground, but we got the land at a really good price. So it was kind of a bit of a trade-off there. But we knew what we were getting into before we started pricing it out in terms of what this land is, what's it going to support, how can we engineer this to go forward and be cost effective. We do environmentals, we do all those things ahead of time so that exactly that we're not running into. I've seen it where, somebody dug and they run into, let's say, an underground river structure. Now, sometimes that's unavoidable because you thought you mapped the whole project, but it happens. So, what can you do at that point in time? Luckily we haven't done that yet. We try to stay above surface for the most part. So we're not having to just put a lot of money into the ground is the best way to say it. So people don't care about what you have in the ground. They want to see what's above ground, right? So.
Absolutely. And of course, you mentioned clay in particular because clay, as its moisture content changes, it tends to pump, which means that you're really not building on a stable substrate.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Clay is depending what kind of clay, right? So when you have really hard clay, where we were, it's a very known that area has that. It allowed us to, we knew exactly what we were getting into, is the best way to say it. If we're on a really unstable clay base area, we would have known that ahead of time. And also in our geotechnical would have discovered that, and we probably would have just walked away from the land, because the more you don't know, the more dollars happen, is basically how you see it.
Exactly. Well, Owen, if folks want to connect, if they want to learn more, what's the best way?
Best way probably is connect with me on LinkedIn, under my name, Owen Reimer, or check out our website. It's stoneshorecapital.com. And connect with me on there and ask me any questions, and love to chat.
Love it. Well, Owen, great to connect. And for the listeners at home, definitely reach out to Owen Reimer at stoneshorecapital.com or connect with him on LinkedIn. The links will be in the show notes. And in the meantime, have an awesome rest of your weekend. Go make some great things happen. And we'll talk to you again tomorrow.